especially in times when we feel alone because of who we are or what we are passionate about. In these times, with so much polarization, it can be hard to find a place to belong, especially if one lives in an environment hostile to one's values or to one's identities. But you are not alone. It can be difficult to express one's progressive religious values against a tide of opposing values. It helps to be with others who are concerned about these issues too. Our Unitarian Universalist congregations can be islands of solidarity in the sea of fear, distrust, and polarization. Here we gather to share progressive values framed by the inherent worth and dignity of all people and our awareness of our place in the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. Our faith homes are places to explore ways to undo white supremacy culture, which places white males at the pinnacle of society, transphobia and homophobia, which threatens people's ability to be who they are and love who they love, religious persecution, sexism, ableism, and so many of the ways that we categorize and separate people. We are committed to caring for one another, the communities in which we live, and our global community. Our congregations are often engaged in social justice ministries in the local area, and we understand that spirituality must be lived in the world, not just talked about on Sunday mornings. We strive to expand the circle of our community ever more and provide sanctuary against the prevailing winds of fear and anger, violence and hatred, which do the most harm to those whom society deems other or lesser. We work together to provide a caring environment for adults, children, and youth. We gather in religious community for replenishment, to celebrate and sing, meditate and pray, laugh and learn together. In Unitarian Universalist communities, we are anchored by mutual promises that call us all into care for one another, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. The search for safety is a natural human drive, but congregations are not places to hide from the world and the work that we are called to do to make it better. They are not immune to the ways privilege and oppression are internalized and manifested. Nor are they places to avoid accountability for the ways we all participate in oppressive systems. But they are full of people who are called by our principles to be intentional about offering understanding and support to each other. Unitarian Universalism is a faith centered on nurturing the most compassionate and loving versions of ourselves. Our covenants ask us to place relationships first, no matter how we differ in belief, background, life experience, or identity. And our faith is shaped by our commitment to our covenants. We seek to create brave space where people can come to understand that we are all loved and lovable, valued and valuable. Unitarian Universalist congregations create the opportunity for spiritual exploration, deeper self-understanding, and self-acceptance. Audre Lorde wrote, "At last you'll know with surpassing certainty that only one thing is more frightening than speaking your truth, and that is not speaking." Our Unitarian Universalist congregations welcome you, whoever you are, as you are, and hope to inspire and encourage you to live a life of integrity, service, and love.
Opening words by Reverend Walter Royal Jones, Jr. Mindful of truth, ever exceeding our knowledge, and community ever exceeding our practice, reverently we covenant together, beginning with ourselves as we are, to share the strength of integrity and the heritage of the Spirit in the unending quest for wisdom and love. Come and let us worship together.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving houses, no carer than all of despair. Come, yet again, come. Then all air is spent, no bargain to stay.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our great covenant.
Hi, my name is Lauren Wyeth, and I have a story for everyone, small and big. And it's kind of a small story about a small thing that my son invented. And at first I thought that maybe it was too small of a story to share here. But Adrienne Marie Brown is a big thinker and writer with a big heart and a big imagination and big ideas. And she says, small is good. Small is all. And I think that's true about this lesson that my son taught me. So here's the story. When Ames was very small, oh my goodness, he was such a cuddly kid. He had a lot of big feelings and he was very expressive. But sometimes when he would get hurt or frustrated, those big feelings would be too much for him and he would get overwhelmed by them. And he wouldn't want to be around anybody. So he'd run off on his own and hide rather than let anybody help him. He'd rather be somewhere where no one could find him and know how upset he was than have someone witness what he was feeling. It was almost like if somebody saw how he felt, it made the big feelings even harder for him to bear. So this one time I saw Ames fall and get hurt and go off on his own. And I wanted to help, but I didn't want to intrude. So I went over to where he was and sat a few feet away from him and asked as gently as I could, "Hey, Ames, could I give you a little hug?" And he said no by shaking his head. But then without saying anything else, he turned and moved a little toward me and he went like this. And I took my pointer finger and reached back toward his. And we sat like that for a minute with our fingers touching until he was ready to talk. He didn't want a big response. He didn't want a lot of attention. He didn't want everyone coming over and giving him advice, trying to help in a loud way. He just needed this small gesture, this finger meeting finger. We needed to start there. So this small act became a thing between us that helped us over and over again as Ames was growing up. And it didn't just help him, it helped me too. I remember one time when I was quite sick and I'd been in bed for a couple of days and I was not even really feeling well enough to talk. And I heard the door open and Ames crept into my room. And then I felt a little finger on my finger. And he stayed there beside me for a few minutes. And that was the most comfort that I had felt during that whole time I'd been sick. It was so sweet that he showed up in that way, with that little act of love. And then when he got older, when he was a teenager, sometimes we couldn't seem to agree on just about anything. But if we were in the middle of a conflict and one of us would go like this, the other one would always reach back. It was like we had this unspoken pact that if someone did this, you had to meet them there. You had to match that little act of love. You had to slow down. We had to remember that, of course, we love each other. Of course, we're on the same team. Of course, we can get through this. We can figure it out together. That little act was really a helpful starting point for us many times. Small is good. Small is all. That's true in a lot of situations. It's true in our justice work too, for example. When big things, really big things, aren't fair or right in the world, we might think that a small act doesn't have that much importance or isn't that useful. We think bigger is better. Of course, we want love and liberation right now. You know, we want a world where everyone knows they're loved and shows love for the earth and the animals and one another. But in our big world, there are so many ways we are not all free. We don't all have what we need. We don't all feel like we belong. There are so many things that need fixing that it's tempting to lose hope, to believe that there aren't enough people who care, that the amount of love that I have to give won't be enough, won't make a difference. How can I do anything that's going to help anyway? We can't use love, it is true, to heal an illness. We can't just use love to magically clean a polluted river. Love isn't going to just change unfair laws or remove barriers that make it hard for people to vote. But remember, small is good, small is all. So there's no way to really better understand that than by watching what a small act of love can do. Because acts of love make hard things easier to bear. Like a tiny pointer finger that connects us to one other person and reminds us that we're not alone. Acts of love connect us to other people and those connection points. That's where the magic is. That's where the energy and potential lives. So I want to ask you, what's the very smallest loving action you can think of? The very smallest, the smaller the better. If you're with other people right now, or if you are online together, maybe you can share your ideas out loud or in the chat. I know we want a whole world full of abundant love everywhere for everyone, but if we were to do just the smallest loving action, what would it be? The smaller, the better. Maybe you'd be willing to take one of those small actions and commit to it. Maybe you'd be willing to do that small action every single day for a week, or maybe even for 30 days to get a real streak going. And then you would find, I'm sure, that that small daily act has a much bigger impact than you would have imagined. The first day you might think, that was way too easy. What's the big deal? I should do something bigger. I'm not even sure I want to do this little thing every day. It seems insignificant, but just wait and see. Stay with the small. Small acts of love don't stay small. They expand and they grow and they spread. Dr. Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. But love doesn't start in public. Love starts between you and me. Small is good. Small is all. Let's start there.
Have you ever found God in church? I never did. I just found a bunch of folks hoping for him to show. Any God I ever felt in church, I brought in with me. And I think all the other folk did too. They come to church to share God, but not find God. Here's the thing. The thing I believe, God is inside of you and inside of everybody else. You come into this world with God, but only them that search for him inside find it. And sometimes it just manifests itself, even if you're not looking or don't know what to look for. God ain't a he or she, but an it. What do you think it looks like, I ask? Like nothing. It ain't a picture to show. It ain't something you can look at apart from anything else, including yourself. I believe God is everything. Everything that is, ever was, or will be. And when you can feel that and be happy to feel that, you found it. I learned a new term this week, and it is joyful to have found a word that fits what I'm feeling and what I sense other people are feeling. Disenfranchised grief. grief that you don't talk about. You can't talk about. There's no one to share it with in the community, in the world, with your friend. So, the joy is that there is a community that will share your disenfranchised grief. Come, come, come. Come to worship. Come to feel. Come to prayer. Come to meditation. But come and bring your grief with you. Whether it be small, humongous, or in between. Know that there is joy in that there is some place you can share that unspoken grief. Remember our friends, remember our acquaintances, remember the people who have problems, who have joys, who have concerns, who are in transition. Remember the people and know, everyone, that we stand with you. Join me in prayer. May we remember each other. May we remember a higher power. May we remember that we are not alone. May there be joy in everything we do and everything that we feel. And if we cannot feel joy, at least know that there is someone to share our grief with. Hold us, comfort us, teach us, and give us peace. Amen.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today at TVUUC. My name is Claudia Presley, and I'm the Director of Administration here. Today is a Share the Plate Sunday. What that means is that any contribution that comes in today will be split between the General Operating Fund of TVUUC and a local organization. Today's organization is the Beck Cultural Center. You'll be seeing a short video here in a few minutes about what the Beck Center does and how that you can help them. The ways that you can give are to go to tvuuc.org/give, or you can text give to the number 73256, type in TVUUC and the amount that you would like to give. So today, please think about what you can do to help this organization and to help TVUUC. Once again, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.
Welcome back. Across the nation, communities are celebrating Black History Month and recognizing the achievements and contributions of African Americans. In Knoxville, there is no shortage of history makers, doers, and achievers. This morning, we take a look at the efforts to preserve and record the African American experience in Knoxville.
There were old African American newspapers. So you could come in here and you could begin to go through and really get a taste of what life was like.
History at your fingertips. The Beck Cultural Exchange Center gives East Tennesseans a glimpse of Knoxville's history with old books, black and white photos, relics from Knoxville of decades past.
History is hard sometimes, especially some of the history of African Americans and those folks that were disenfranchised. So it's difficult sometimes to revisit those moments. But what we like to do here at Beck is to help us digest those moments in history in a way that we learn and grow from them.
Started in 1975, the Beck bears the name of the late James and Ethel Beck, a prominent and influential Knoxville couple from the 20s through 60s. Photos show them engaging with history giants like W.E.B. Du Bois and Martin Luther King Jr. Reverend Renee Kessler serves as president of the museum and community center. She says it tells the story of blacks in Knoxville who changed the landscape of the city, people you sometimes won't find with an internet search.
You may never even know that this existed right here in your own community, but they did. And indeed, their stories are important, and you get an opportunity to not only know and hear their stories and see their stories in the pictures, but you also get to experience that and then learn and grow from that.
And here's an area many will never see at the Beck, and that's the archive studio. Hundreds of boxes that preserve the history of the African American experience here in Knoxville. Take a look at this. This is a Knoxville College yearbook back in 1925, showing all those old photos of what life was like back then.
You may have heard of the name Cal Johnson. He was a former slave turned millionaire businessman who built the first racetrack in Knoxville, now known as Speedway Circle.
And what's really interesting is the very first plane that ever landed in Knoxville and or ever took off in Knoxville did so on his track. And you know whose plane that was? The Wright brothers. Came in 1911.
And there is no shortage of history makers coming out of Knoxville.
The thing that's so great, though, Tirson, that we love to talk about is he is a native Knoxvillian. He is from Knoxville. And so there's a house that actually still stands in South Knoxville.
A law room dedicated to Judge William Hastie, whom President Franklin Roosevelt appointed the nation's first African-American federal magistrate. So many remarkable stories to be told of perseverance and strength of community sitting under one roof.
I believe by faith that Knoxville can be a model to our greater community, our greater nation, about what it really means to embrace one another, to care for one another, and to genuinely seek to know each other better. And that's what we do here.
And they do it one visitor at a time.
I can't stress enough how everybody needs to go and visit. It really just kind of completes the stories that you hear about Knoxville from decades past.
Right.
And fill some holes, because what I love about there, it's everybody's story. It's not just all black history, it's the intertwining of what Knoxville's white citizens did to help and kind of just move things forward. And they also have oral history.
Right.
From 1919, the folks who were here for the 1990 race riot, they have folks that give the account from that time, and you can go in and listen for free. All of it is free, and even going in to just go and use the facility itself.
I thought it was interesting, Reverend Kessler saying history is hard, it's tough to revisit sometimes, but they take it and they hope that we build and learn from it, and that's the whole purpose there. I thought it was very interesting.
Fantastic experience. All right, so again, it is free. Go online to our website. We have everything you need to know to go and visit the Beck and get more information.
Haters gonna hate. Such is the conventional wisdom that comes to us through street slang. And it seems to have a certain determinism to it. It seems to suggest that haters are going to hate in this cycle of hatred that will go on until the end of time. But what if we want to do something to break the cycle of hatred? What if we recognize that we ourselves are the haters and we want to do something to change things, to make things different? If hatred is a toxin, if hatred is a poison, this morning I want to ask, are there antidotes to hate? One of the most profound theological lessons I learned in theology school didn't come from a textbook and it didn't come from a professor, but it came from one of my fellow classmates. And in a conversation, he revealed to me that he had been diagnosed with the disease AIDS. And this is in a time when there were very few treatments for that disease. Even so, he said he wanted an alternative to the warfare model toward disease, where we declare war on cancer or war on heart disease or war on AIDS. He wanted a more peaceful approach to the disease. He was raised in the Quaker tradition, which teaches we should be grounded in that spirit and power which takes away the occasion for war. And so he wanted to have a more peaceful approach to healing as he faced his disease, not to meet his disease as an aggressor, not to meet his disease as an enemy to be vanquished. But if it was an enemy, he wanted to learn how to love his enemy, to make peace with his condition. And the way my classmate talked about his disease really had a profound change on me and the way that I look at life. It's a chance to look at all things through that lens of peace. Now, one of my heroes in the civil rights movement is Fannie Lou Hamer. And I admire her for her courage in the face of extremely dangerous situations as she worked for civil rights in Mississippi in the 1960s. But one of the things that Fannie Lou Hamer said is she refused to have anyone drag her down into the hell of hatred just because that person hated her. She didn't want to respond to hate with hate. She wanted to respond grounded in something more deep and more profound than that. She said that hatred is like a cancer that eats away at our vital center, leaving only the shell. And that's not what she wanted from her life. In her lifetime, she felt that hatred was a disease that was making the whole country sick. And indeed, we could say the same thing today. And because she felt like hatred was a disease that was making the whole nation sick, she said she worked for human rights and not equality, because she didn't want to be equal to the people who shot out her windows at night. She didn't want to be equal to the people who terrorized her and her family. She didn't want to be equal to the people who threw her in jail for registering to vote. She didn't want to be equal to the people who beat her because she worked for justice. She didn't want an equality grounded in hatred. She wanted to work for the worth and dignity of every single person. Describing her approach to community organizing, she wrote these words. She said, "I hope white America learns to love before they teach everyone else how to hate. I refuse to hate someone because they hate me. Because if I hate you because you hate me, it's no different. Both of us are miserable. Both of us have finally found something in common, hating. But as a result of what I give of myself, that I love you if you hate me, we have poor whites coming into our organization, and we're going to feed not only black people in Sunflower County, but all people who are hungry regardless of color." Fannie Lou Hamer wasn't about building up resentments or building up anger or building up aggression. She was about building up the beloved community. Love is the spirit of this church. We say those words every Sunday because they speak to a central value in our religious lives. And sometimes when we say them, I'm reminded of the words that the author Alice Walker wrote in her book Color Purple, words that she has her character Shug speak. When Shug asks, "Have you ever found God in a church?" "I never did. I just found a bunch of folks hoping for him to show. Any God I found in church, I brought with me." I think we're living in a time of great controversy in our culture. And if people cannot find God in a church, it's because they find hate. People are bringing hate to church, hate that they found on cable news, hate that they found on the internet, hate that they found in conversations with an office worker. People are bringing hate to church. And what we are looking for is love. Alice Walker is a pagan and a Buddhist, and yet her words remind us of the words from the New Testament in the book of John. Whoever loves is born of God and knows God, and who does not love does not know God, for God is love. The Unitarian Universalist Church comes out of the radical Reformation and the love doctrine that was central to it. It's a reaction to all of the theological disputation that led to violence, that led to heresy trials, that led to religious wars and inquisitions. And it was an effort to ground religion in love and peace. It was felt that theological acrimony, all the acrimony and theological disputation, poisoned the living water from which we all should draw. And we should not want the well to be poisoned because everyone needs to drink from the same well. So there are obscure doctrines that people would fight about, doctrines like Trinitarianism versus Unitarianism, or transubstantiation versus consubstantiation, or premillennialism versus postmillennialism. These are opaque theological doctrines. And yet all of us can practice the law of love. We don't have to have a theology degree to practice the law of love. We don't have to go to law school to practice the law of love. The law of love is simple. It has been placed into our minds and written into our hearts. As Jesus said to his disciples as he was washing their feet, he said, "A new commandment give I unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you. By this all shall know that you are my disciples." And the Apostle Paul would later wrote that all the laws of the Torah, all the rules in the book, can be summarized in the sentence, "Love your neighbor as yourself." So we should love one another because love does not wish harm on anyone. Love does not harm neighbor. Love is the fulfillment of the law. And so we are called to ground our spiritual lives in love. There's a reading from the words from the Sermon on the Mount. "Blessed are the pure at heart, for they shall see God." Notice he didn't say, "Blessed are the pure in doctrine. Blessed are the pure in dogma." It's blessed are the pure at heart. Religion is a heart thing. So all these theological doctrines can be obscure, but the law of love is simple. The law of love is simple. Hatred constricts us. Love liberates us. Hatred imprisons us. Love sets us free. Hatred casts shadows. Love sheds light. There's an old preacher story about a minister who married a medical doctor, and they're at a cocktail party when someone approaches them and says, "Is it true that you're both doctors?" And the minister answers, "Yes, it is true, but I have a doctorate in theology." And the person says, oh, that's very interesting. What sort of disease is theology? It won't surprise you that I've heard that story in theology school, where it's widely recognized that theology can be a disease. Theology becomes a disease when it gives us complexity instead of simplicity when we need it. Theology becomes a disease when it gives us polarization when unity is what is required. Theology becomes a disease when it encourages us to harbor grudges or store up resentments or form bitter enemies in the world. Theology is a disease when it leads to violence. When the Civil War happened in Bosnia, there was Muslim killing Christian and Christian killing Muslim, leading an Orthodox bishop to say, violence in the name of God is violence against God. Violence in the name of any religion is violence against all religions. All religions call us to peace. When theology leads to violence, it has become a disease. And so at that moment, we need an antidote. We need empathy. We need compassion. We need love. A theology can become a disease when it encourages us to hate, because hatred is very bad for the body. Hatred stirs up all the anger and aggression emotions that lead to fight and flight impulses, releasing the stress hormones that are hard on our cardiovascular system and weaken our immune system. People who are angry and people who are hating, they get higher blood pressure and a higher heart rate, and they tend to have more perspiration and more muscle tension. All of these things undermining basic health. So when theology leads to hatred, it becomes a disease that can lead to heart attack and strokes and other diseases caused by a weakened immune system. Now, my sister is focused on physical healing of the body. She's a rolfer. And whenever she does work on my back, she'll often sort of trace her hands across my back. And here's the thing, I think of myself as a relaxed person, a person who's easygoing. And she'll trace her hand across my back and say, you are storing your tension here. And I'll go, ah! She'll find just that spot in my body where tension is being held. Spiritually, something else is at work. I find whenever I sit down to be quiet, to be still, to be peaceful, to meditate, I often locate that part of my spirit that wants to go, ah! I'll sit down to meditate, and all of a sudden the face of someone will pop up in me, just pop up in my mind's eye, and it's a person who's angry at me, or a person who's critical of me, or somebody who's been irritating me lately, and their face will be. And the only way I've found to clear my mind is to pray for that person. The only way I've found to clear my mind is to love that person. And then when I do that, I am able to clear my mind and become receptive and find peace again. Now, I came up with this on my own, but medical research shows that when we engage in empathetic reappraisal of another person, a person who has harmed us or a person who has hurt us, if we do empathetic reappraisal, then our blood pressure goes down and our heart rate goes down and our muscle tension goes down, and the hormones that can, when they're released, can hurt our cardiovascular system or undermine our immune system, they decrease too. And so when we let go of hatred, healing can begin. Thich Nhat Hanh, who died recently, was a peace activist. As a Buddhist monk in Vietnam, he worked for peace in the height of the Vietnam War, and he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1967 by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. After that war, he worked for peace all over the world. and he would do retreats, spiritual retreats for peace activists. And one of the things he observed is that peace activists aren't always at peace. Like human beings of any kind, peace activists can hold anger and resentments and bitterness in their hearts. And sometimes peace activists are better at writing a protest letter than a love letter. And so those of us who aspire to work for peace, we would do well to learn how to write a letter that someone would actually want to read. To write a letter that someone wouldn't just crumple up in a ball and throw in the trash can right away. To send an email that someone wouldn't delete automatically. To learn to convey our message of peace in the spirit of peace. Because before there can be peace on earth, there needs to be peace in our hearts. Valentine's Day is often a time when we think about writing love letters. So it's a good time to think about writing love letters. It can also be a time to heal from a broken heart. It can be a time to heal from fractured relationships. It can be a time to heal from broken promises. As long as we're in a safe place and nobody can hurt us, it can be good to let go. It can be good to forgive. It can be good to move on. And this spirit we can bring into our work for peace in the larger world. When we work for a world made fair and all her people one, we well and truly side with love. I began this sermon by talking about a classmate who wanted to find something other than a warfare model to deal with his disease. He didn't want to make war on a disease. He wanted to find peace. And by not releasing those aggressive hormones that lead to stress-related diseases and weaken the immune system, especially when he needed that immune system the most. He wanted to find a way, a peaceful model for handling the disease. And I think about him often in the midst of COVID-19 because we are trying to find a model for dealing with this disease. And in my more candid moments, I will tell you, I hate this disease. I hate what it's done to our church. I hate what it's done to our community. I hate what it's done to so many families who've lost loved ones. I hate what it's done to the politics of our state, our city, our county, and our nation. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. And yet this hatred doesn't really harm anyone but myself. This hatred is entirely counterproductive. And so I'm ready and open for change. On the Sunday before Valentine's Day, I'm open to the possibility of breaking the cycles of hatred, of moving beyond the cycle of haters gonna hate that lasts until the end of time. On the Sunday before Valentine's Day, let's be open together to breaking that cycle of hatred. Let us be open together to side with love.
Closing words by Theodore Parker. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space, its shrine, the good heart, its creed, all truth, its ritual, works of love, its profession of faith, divine living.
As our last act of worship, I invite you to greet your neighbor. Send a text or an email, make a phone call, reach out in some way. Come to our virtual coffee hour after the service, or come to one of our in-person or online events during the week. Prophetic Church, the world awaits your liberating ministry. Go forward in the power of love. Proclaim the truth that makes us free.